Okay, thanks everybody for turning up for the Scrutiny Committee the 27th of November, and the usual housekeeping rules apply. And so, do we have any apologies for today's meeting?
Yes, Convener, we have apologies from Councillor Dugan and Councillor Purvis, and we have Councillor Drysdale substituting for Councillor Dugan, and potentially Councillor Jarvis for Councillor Purvis.
Okay, thanks. Any declarations of interest today in respect of the items of business? Councillor Hearn.
Yeah, declaration of interest in item 4.2 as a member of the Culture Perth and Kinross Board.
Thanks. Councillor Coates.
Declaration of interest in the item on Horsecross Arts.
Thanks. And that's Councillor Parrott as well. And I have the same declaration of interest on the item with Live Active Leisure, and I will hand over to Councillor Parrott to chair that part of the meeting. Councillor McEwen. As well. Thank you. For anybody can stay in the room for any of these. It saves people going if they want, if they wish, but they can't comment, take part in the debate. Okay. Thank you. So we go to the minutes of the 18th of September 2019. I'd like to make a point on the minute that the last item was Business Gateway. I was remitted by the committee to write to the leader of Dundee City Council regarding the situation with Business Gateway. I spoke with the Chief Executive and decided that we would give them an extra period of time to see if things could be worked out. Unfortunately, there's been no break to the impasse, so I will now write to the leader of Dundee City Council because there's been no break to that. So that's my only comment in the minute. Is there any other questions on the minute? Can we agree the minute? Thank you. So we go to the update of arm's length external organisations. All three ALIOs will be appearing today, and we're going to start with Horsecross Arts Limited, and we'll have some members of the board coming forward. Thanks very much. Thanks for your attendance here today. And for those who are new to the committee, you may wish to introduce yourself, Magnus.
Magnus Linklater, Chair of House Horse.
And I'm Jason Ellis, Vice Chair.
We'll start the session on Horsecross Arts. We'll have an update in a slide-based presentation on Horsecross Arts by Fiona Robertson.
Thanks, Convener. Councillors, can you hear me? Yes, great. Scott Walker and I are actually going to do a double act on Horsecross, and this is just an update, a very brief update on the work that we've been doing since around about the 12th of August, which is when council officers started working alongside the team in Horsecross Arts to look at various issues, particularly around financial management, but some other issues as well. So what we're going to do first, if it's okay, Convener, is Scott is just going to give you an update on the financial position, and then I will talk about some of the wider areas of improvement that we've been looking at with the Horsecross team. And then the Horsecross Chair and Vice Chair, I'm sure, will want to pick up and elaborate on what we have said. Okay, so Scott, do you want to?
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, just before I start, I'd like to pay tribute to my colleagues in finance as well as the colleagues in Horsecross who have assisted me to get to where we are today. The tables you're going to see on the next couple of slides are the information we took to the Horsecross board at the end of October. So they've considered this in detail. I'm just going to take you through some of the highlights So the first slide is the commercial or horse cross trading, and this deals with the conference and catering side of horse cross arts. So in summary, what we're doing is we're projecting £1.036 million of income from the trading side of the business. Now these are the projections based on the September actuals. And of that £1.036 million, we're estimating that £813,000 will come from catering and £222,000 will come from the conference side of the business. We're also projecting costs of running that part of the business of £845,000. So the headline figure in terms of the trading side of horse cross is we're projecting a profit of £191,000. And that's similar to the positions that we've reported for horse cross trading over previous years. Any questions on that table? Okay. So now we turn to the charitable side of the organisation. So again, we're projecting
Sorry, Scott.
Sorry.
I meant to ask, is that across both venues?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it's split is there's the charitable arm and there is the trading arm, but it covers both venues. Yeah. So in terms of the charitable side of the business, we are projecting expenditure of £4.4 million. Again, that's consistent with previous years. We also set out total income of just over £4 million, and you'll see down there on the table where we're getting it from: core funding, ticket sales, rental income, etc. So what we're doing is we're projecting a deficit before other income of £418,500 on the charitable side of the business. Now in the current year, the council has already committed an extra £180,000, and that's reflected on the table. And we've also received other grant funding of £97,000. So the operating projected deficit, based on the September actuals to the end of 2019-20, is £141,500. Any questions at that point?
So, and that's including the extra 180,000 that was already put in. Okay,
So what this assumes is the full 180,000. This is a projected outturn, so it includes the 180,000. We have not paid it all across yet. That'll be done as and when it's required in terms of cash flow. We've paid across 130,000 to date. So finally, what that means is that as at September, we advised the board of a projected surplus for 2019-20 of £50,000, which is a bit of a turnaround from last year where it was about £250,000. A couple of things that have happened since then. Horse Cross have appointed chief executive earlier than we had anticipated, so that's been factored in now, and we've got updated trading position. So what that does is that knocks off £23,000 from the projected surplus. So where we think we'll be at the end of this current financial year is a surplus of £27,000, so still in the black. I do, however, have to bring a couple of issues to your attention. The £27,000 surplus does include a couple of non-recurring issues. It includes the council funding and the additional council funding, and it includes the savings on senior management posts, which may come back next year depending upon restructuring. So that would adjust the surplus down to a deficit. However, that's not what we're projecting the current year. The current year we are projecting a surplus of £27,000 at this time. Any questions at that stage?
Just for clarity, and I think I understand it, this year, 27k surplus.
Yes.
But the bulk of that 27k surplus seems to be made up by there not being a chief exec in post for the full year, and also with the chief finance officer not being in post, and the additional funding from PKC.
Yeah, so
Quite happy to take questions as we go rather than wait to the end. Right, thank you. Councillor McCall.
Provided by the council. Is that non-refundable? Or will it eventually come back to the council at some point?
It's grant funding.
It's grant
The
funding,
council has
okay.
assumed it's paid across to Horsecross and it's used to support Horsecross. So it's not a loan, it's a grant.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Drysdale.
Mine's working. Thanks, thanks, Scott. So just for clarity, however, what we're seeing here that there is a structural deficit which has been on a one-off basis funded by the council and has been offset by the slippage and timing of appointment of senior officers. So without that, the forecast deficit for 1920 would have been 243,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. If you want to continue, Scott, or if that's you.
Okay, so Scott's summarised the financial position for you, councillors. What I'm going to do briefly now is just take you through some of the wider improvements that have been underway over the last 3 months and which will continue. As Scott's mentioned, Horsecross has now appointed a new interim chief executive who starts with the organisation this Monday. In fact, that's Nick Williams, who comes to the organisation with a strong background in theatre. And Magnus may want to say more about that. The areas up there on the slide, which I'll briefly take you through, financial management and control, so that's looking at how the organisation approaches its finances more generally. Scott's obviously given you the current position. Some issues around compliance more generally, programming, which the committee asked quite a few questions about when it met back in September, operational efficiency, just more generally, how Horsecross works as an organisation, and finally governance, and then I'll hand over to Magnus. So as Scott has mentioned, apologies, that's probably a bit small to read, but Scott's team have made a lot of headway in improving the approach to financial management in Horsecross, and I would also like to pay tribute here to the Horsecross finance team itself, which is a small team. We have put some temporary restructure in place for that team, so there's now an acting team leader, and we've appointed 2 additional members of staff to help with the quite large amount of day-to-day financial processing that goes on in the organisation. It's not the biggest organisation, but it is complex, and it's got commercial aspects to its business, a trading arm, as you know, as well as a wide range of charitable activities. We have tightened up the budget management and control arrangements with budget holders. There's still some work to do on that, and we are getting a little bit of external advice on the internal management controls that individual budget holders, are exercising. We've also been having a look at staff costs. Horsecross, and this is not unusual, it's not a failing, but there's quite a strong reliance on casual, freelance and agency staff of various aspects of its business, but we think that there's probably ways of making that more efficient, so we're having a look at that. So there are various things which are underway to get the organisation to a more sustainable place, just in terms of how it plans, manages and monitors its financial health, if you like. In terms of compliance, because there are a number of areas that we've been looking at alongside financial governance and compliance, so we carried out a health and safety compliance audit earlier in the summer with some independent experts, a company called Law at Work, who do quite a lot of work with organisations like Horsecross. They're also the health and safety advisors to Culture, Perth Kinross, who you'll be hearing from next. That work's been carried out under the direction of one of the subcommittees of the Horsecross board, It has showed a number of areas where compliance could be improved, and we're working through those together with each head of department in Horse Cross Arts, all of whom have got responsibility for different aspects of health and safety. And we've got some staff training, which is happening alongside that. We're reviewing the child protection policies and updating that, and again doing some further staff trainings. Quite a lot of new members of staff have joined the organisation over the last 12 months. A lot of activities with young people, so we're just making sure that that is all watertight. Similarly, freedom of information and complaints, we've recommended, and we are implementing some improvements to policy and practice, and making sure that staff in Horse Cross are aware of the organisation's responsibilities in respect of those two areas. So that work, in terms of which is all under the umbrella of compliance, is underway. Programming, and Magnus may want to say more about this. I did a piece of work on the current approach to programming together with the creative programmers, creative directors and the artistic director in Perth Theatre. I've set out 6 recommendations to the board, which you can see up there on the slide, which include, on an annual basis, reviewing what's worked well, what's not worked so well, what the organisation has learnt about audiences, what it needs to continue doing and build on because it's a strength, and what it might need to change. It's important that the organisation has clear criteria for the programme decisions that it makes, and that those are transparent and clear to everyone. In terms of community insight and perspectives on the programme, I've recommended that Horse Cross sets up a community programme panel or sounding board, and the artistic director of Perth Theatre is now taking that forward. A delivery group with all the key staff in the organisation who are involved in programming, and that's not just the programmers and the artistic director of the theatre, it's marketing, everyone, production, technical team, everyone who has a stake in making the programme successful. The performance and financial monitoring of programming does need to strengthen, and that's within the umbrella of the wider recommendations that we've made about financial monitoring and control. And finally, just setting some clear delegated authority levels for who can make decisions about programming, what decisions can be taken by individual programmers, what needs to go to the subcommittee of the board which looks after programming, and what should be escalated to the main board for decision, because some of these decisions, particularly financial decisions, are quite significant, so it's important that they're taken at the right level. Operational efficiency, just some general things here, but happy to take any questions on these, of course, at the end. We've put some just very simple things in place, like a weekly management team meeting. We've carried out some staff briefings for Horse Cross staff over the last few months, because clearly, a fair amount of anxiety and lots of questions for staff about what's happening and why council staff have been in and about the organisation. So we've done what we can to make sure that Horse Cross staff have got the information that they need, that where there are any sort of worries that are unfounded, that we can get rid of those and reassure people that the council is committed to getting Horse Cross to a sustainable place in the future. We've put some additional support in place for a couple of teams. I've talked about the finance team, the marketing team as well. We've done quite a lot of work with them, looking at the workloads that they manage, which are quite significant, how some key aspects of the marketing function, particularly social media and a couple of other things as well, could maybe just be made a bit more streamlined to reduce some of the pressure on staff. We've done some analysis of some of the key activities, just profit and loss analysis. That's largely been on the commercial side of the business, so catering, the conference offer, what that looks like, how it's presented and marketed, and also Southern Fried. We thought that was quite a good case study of an area of programming which has been very successful in the past, but it did incur costs, additional costs in 2018, so we did some work looking at what that told us about how programme is delivered and maybe if there were some lessons to be learnt from that. And finally, we've made some recommendations to the Horsecross board. The board had a special board meeting on the 30th of October, which Scott and I attended along with other colleagues. So we've made some recommendations which are in principle recommendations at this stage. They're not detailed recommendations about changes to staff, structure or remits and roles, areas where we think the organisation can make savings and efficiencies. And they are for consideration now by the board and then to be taken forward by Nick Williams as the new interim chief executive, and Magnus may want to say more about that. Finally, on board governance, again, we've made some recommendations to the board about how governance and accountability frameworks could be strengthened and improved. The council chief executive met the board to discuss those in the middle of this month, a couple of weeks ago now. The board has provided a formal response to the council chief executive on our recommendations, and again, Magnus may want to say more about that work. So that's a very quick overview of where we are, councillors, but are there any questions on anything that I've said before we hand over to Magnus?
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to the slide you had there with your 6 recommendations. Do I understand from that those were all lacking? And this is something that you're saying to the board that needs to take part? Because a lot of that's fundamental in running an organisation like that. And I just find it very alarming that that was not in place beforehand.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hearn. I'm not sure it would be right to say all of those are lacking. I think it would be fair to say that they have not been in place systematically, and in fairness to Horsecross, there has been quite a high turnover of staff at senior management team level for various reasons. So I think the task for Horsecross now is to put these things into place and sustain them over time.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I think on the slide after that, Fiona, is on that one? Yeah, there's a mention there on the pay and grading, consideration of 0 hours contracts. What consideration has been given to those?
Thank you for the question. So that work is still underway. There are about 140 staff in Horsecross who are on casual contracts of different kinds. Some of them are 0 hours contracts, but there are different types of 0 hours contracts, and some of these working arrangements do suit the members of staff concerned. It is important to stress that. I think the bigger issue is really around making sure that the pay and grading structure overall is fit for purpose in terms of what the organisation is there to do. In terms of living wage considerations, we do need to work through the costing for that and what that is likely to cost the organisation in the future. So that's quite a big piece of work, Councillor McCall, which is by no means complete at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was just a comment you made about Southern Fried and it not going ahead. And I'm just wondering, in the wider context of Perth and Kinross, what is the economic impact to the wider Perth and Kinross economy of that not going ahead? Has that been considered or taken into account by the council?
I think any event and festival, and Southern Fried is a really successful and high profile festival, which is good for the city centre. I don't think that's in any doubt. The council has never commissioned an economic impact assessment of Southern Fried, nor has Horsecross as far as I'm aware, but I think there's lots of evidence, from similar events or broadly comparable events, which shows that of course these things are a good thing. The reason that Southern Fried didn't go ahead in 2019 is because Horsecross board, as I understand it, did want to take stock of how it had performed the year before and think about how it might need to change in the future, and that's perfectly valid. There are some issues which we're still in the process of looking into, Councillor McCall, so there's not much more I can say to the committee at this stage. around the cost of Southern Fried, what it's cost in the past. But you're absolutely right. Of course, there's an indirect benefit to the organisation if any aspect of programme is generating income and making a profit. Obviously, that's a good thing. And then there are the wider indirect benefits of bringing people into the city centre and the wider what that will generate in terms of wider visitor spend.
Thank you. So, Amanda, should I understand then that it was a 1-year suspension of the Southern Fried Festival, and there's still consideration that it may proceed in future?
That will be a decision for Magnus and the board, but that's my understanding, yes.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener, and apologies if I'm asking questions at the wrong time or it's probably a question I should have addressed to Scott because we have the detailed financial picture that wasn't on the slides, but the breakdown of the income and expenditure account. But it feeds into the comment that Fiona made regarding the need to strengthen and look at financial performance and monitoring. So I don't know who's to answer this question, to be honest, but when you look at the detailed figures here and the actual figures for the 6 months to the end of September, and you isolate ticket sales and direct costs of production, and you look at these two figures together, then for the 6 months to the end of September, there's an adverse variance of 163,000, which is obviously a major contribution, if not the only contribution, to the overall forecast deficit. So against that background, I was just wanting to understand better, because as I say, it's the first time at this committee, understand better what to date has gone into the selection of productions, the assessment of demand for tickets and the pricing of tickets, to date, never mind going forward, but what's happened to date.
I think that's probably a question best answered by the chair, Councillor Drysdale.
Johnson, councillors. So, yeah, I think also that, to be fair to Horsecross and that, the funding comes from Creative Scotland, etc. And it's not just purely ticket sales. And I feel as well that it was maybe a bit hard earlier on because I was only looking at the figures from Scott before I saw all the work that's been done. So it's maybe unfair to compare this last year, which has, with the one-off payments, is showing a profit, a surplus of 27,000. If all these things are taken in, it's unfair of us to say, well, that 180,000 and other savings wouldn't be achieved, because that's what the idea of the whole review that's going on and working collaboratively between officers of council and officers of Horsecross. So I'm a lot more hopeful that I don't think we should judge what's going to happen in the future for what's happened in the past because of the changes that are being made. I think that would be unfair. So
if you don't mind, so I was absolutely asking retrospectively what had happened to date, and not about the future direction of travel here, which I understand and hope is to be improved, but it's really just to understand what goes into selection of production and pricing of tickets.
That's great. We'll pass that one over. But are there any questions to Fiona? Do you feel, Fiona, it's just a subjective thing, that all of these things, that programmes that you're putting into place will be able to be achieved for the start of the next financial year, or are they starting to take effect already?
Some of the improvements that we've made have just been, we've been able to put into place very quickly, and hopefully they're having an effect immediately. Some of them, as you can see, are going to take a bit longer. The question for the board, which I know it is considering very carefully at the moment, is how that structural deficit issue, which Scott's talked about, is going to be addressed in the longer term.
Thanks. Another question nobody else has got any at the moment. The other question would be, moving forward with the appointment of a new interim CEO and probably the appointment of a new Chief Finance Officer, will there still be collaborative work between officers of the council and Horsecross moving forward, or will it revert to, you know, being completely standalone, like an ALIO on its own right?
With Nick Williams' arrival on Monday, council officers will step back from the day-to-day role that we've been carrying out in Horsecross, because that was never intended to be a long-term situation, and it's not appropriate for an ALIO to have council officers working in that way. It was really a last resort position because of the situation Horsecross found itself in earlier this year. However, there'll obviously need to be some handover and some transition support for Nick and his team, and some key considerations about what the future organisational structure of Horsecross might look like, including the leadership of the finance function. And there are a number of different ways that can be approached, which we've suggested to the board they might want to have a think about.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. If there's no other questions, we'll ask either Magnus or Jason to contribute.
It is now. Yeah, I'll just pick up from where Fiona left off, if that's all right. First of all, I'd just like to record our thanks to both Fiona and Scott for stepping in during the last few months. It's been a very valuable period because it's enabled us to take an objective look at the organisation as a whole, and how it's run, and what the things that are working and the things that are working less well. And coming out of that, we have been asked to look at a series of recommendations for both changing the structure of the organisation and the board governance, and going down into more detail some of the aspects of marketing, fundraising, etc. Just picking up on the point, I'd just like to say that it is not as if we have done nothing on these. We were doing a lot of work on this under our previous chief executive, and he left finally in June, and the process of recruiting a successor went through a couple of phases, and first time around we were not successful. This time around we have been successful. So that period has been one of where the vacuum has been filled with the help from Fiona and Scott, and coming out of that have been a series of recommendations which I can say that we have accepted almost wholesale. One or two details that we're still working on, but broadly speaking, in the headline approach has to be how are we going to tackle that deficit, and that's the question that I guess most people would like to know, and that is work that we are undertaking already in terms of looking at the whole way that the company is structured and whether it can be made more efficient, and various recommendations have been made which are extremely valuable and which, with the arrival of a new chief executive, we can address. And I'd just like to say a bit at this stage about Nick Williams. The interview process, we did 2 interviews and we had 3 promising candidates. Second interview was asking each of them to look specifically at how Horsecross is run and what efficiencies and restructuring they would bring in. And Nick Williams impressed us hugely with his grasp of that. He comes from principally a theatre background, which is important, obviously, to us, but a very broad range of experience across both theatre, arts organisations, mainly in England, the Arts Council, and, interestingly, work within a council, Westminster Council. So he comes with a lot of experience, not just of the cultural aspect, of the programming aspect, but of how companies function, how they're structured, and how they can be made more efficient. And we were very impressed with the ideas, which interestingly do reflect to a considerable degree the proposals which Fiona has suggested and put up to the board, and which the board is happy to accept and go forward with. We not only need to tackle that deficit, we need to build up reserves as well. We need to have a program for building up reserves. That program inevitably will take longer, but it is part of one of our targets, and has to be, because if we're to run this company responsibly, we have to have proper reserves. We need a clear operational plan and a trading company business plan and programming for both venues, and they are our principal tasks. On the board itself, we are actually we've had 3 departures, but we are looking for 4 new board members, and we've got an advertising approach which is about to go out, and we take on board again some very useful work that Fiona has done on how you ensure that a board is fully representative both of the community and of the different skills that we need. We've had a skills matrix drawn up which tells us exactly what kind of people we're looking for. We know that we need to be more a more balanced board. We need more community representation on it, probably some younger members. We've got a great plan which we're going to be funded for, which is to identify, recruit and train up a young board member who, and there's an organisation called Arts and Business which is going to help us do that, so that we hope that within the next month or 2 we will have a strong and representative board to oversee these various plans. As Fiona has mentioned, there are specific things that need to be improved, and marketing and programming, of course, are at the heart of that. I would have said, from my point of view, that the biggest challenge we face is building an audience for our new theatre. Perth Kinross Council invested £15 million in a wonderful new theatre, which those who visit it like. We have a programme, we have a lot of work to do on our programming. We have had some successes and full houses for more popular things. Agatha Christie, amazingly, still fills the theatre. But we also are ambitious. We have to be to reflect Creative Scotland's funding for that, which expects us to do high quality and perhaps sometimes more challenging work. So we have to balance those 2 ambitions, and that's top of our list, and will be top of Nick Williams's list. And finally, we looking at ticket sales. Again, one of the things that impressed us about our new chief executive was his experience in building ticket sales with a balanced program, and his most recent job was at a theatre in which he managed to transform that with various approaches to ticket sales, which are quite innovative. It's quite a highly skilled business as to how you do it, and he comes with a lot of ideas about that. So we are fully committed to introducing the changes that are necessary to achieve the goal of addressing our costs, addressing our staff structure, boosting our income, and bringing that budget back onto an even keel again. So that's, as it were, our broad approach and our response to the various proposals that Fiona has outlined. I know, Jason, if you want to say any more about that.
That's it. That's it. I don't think there's much I can add to that, Magnus. Actually, I think you've covered it very well. But I can endorse what you say, that the board is very grateful for the work that Fiona and Scott and their teams have done, and we have already debated a lot of these recommendations that have been put to us. And we are now ready to discuss this with our new chief executive and make sure we can get some of these changes implemented in the coming months. Nothing gets sorted out overnight, but I'm quite sure that with a commitment and a new thrust of direction from our new chief executive, we will manage to achieve the savings we need to make to get back online. But as Magnus says, it doesn't happen overnight. It will take time, but we're very committed to do it.
Thanks, Magnus. Thanks, Jason. Yep, I think one of the benefits with having officers and different eyes and maybe a different way of looking at things is that they'll be giving you the tools that you can monitor better. If you're collecting more immediate information of where the money is going, you'll maybe be able to give the finance team and the finance committee a chance of stepping in before things go too far. So hopefully that's been the main benefit of the intervention. Are there any other questions?
I'd like to ask 3 questions, if I may. The first question is, how are you going to rebuild audiences in the theatre?
This is really lies at the heart of what we're asking our chief executive in close partnership with our artistic director, Lou Kemp, to address that on the theatre side. Now, just stick with the theatre for the moment. We've learnt a lot already. As Fiona said, it's only by analysing your audiences and the programme that works and the programme that doesn't work that you can really home in on building an audience. Building an audience for a theatre that's been closed for 4 years is not an easy task. But I believe that with the choice of a chief executive, we can really drill down and begin to work up that successful programme. What we've learned is that the studio theatre is very appealing to a younger audience, and building a younger theatre audience would be a huge achievement. Young people, by and large, this is an overgeneralization, don't go to the theatre. They've got no experience of the theatre. They don't sort of particularly relate to it. But with that studio theatre, the Joan Knight Theatre, we are establishing links with a younger audience and getting that younger audience in. And in the main theatre, we have to reconnect with an audience which is perhaps an older audience and give them the kind of programming that they need and want alongside the other stuff that, for which we've had extremely good reviews, but which have not always filled halls. So that's really the combined approach.
Second question is, Horse Cross is a charity. Can you tell me a little bit? I've heard anecdotally that the youth theatre work is really good. Can you give me a little bit more detail about what we do with young people?
This is what I call the sort of, as it were, the hidden side of Horse Cross's activities. I mean, our work with schools and young people is incredibly important. We worked last year with 45 primary schools and 22 secondary schools, and we have done some wonderful things. I mean, I sat next door to a parent the other day at one performance, and she just couldn't stop talking about how it had transformed the experience of her children. But we work more broadly with obviously we have the Perth Youth Theatre, which is hugely successful, Perth Autism Youth Theatre, the Horse Cross Glee, the Young Dance Company. All these, you know, and I've got a whole list here of what they do, who they work with, and the outcomes as well. And
Magnus,
that
sorry to interrupt, is that part of your SLA, the youth theatre, etc.?
Yes, it is, but we also get funding from Ganahe to help with that. Ganahe has actually been hugely supportive and very helpful in that regard. You know, it's part of what we do. I mean, we contribute, and that is part of the job, and we are delighted to do it, not just because of the connections it makes with young people and the community in general, but what we hope is those young people will be the audiences of the future.
Because we have got the 3 alios to see today.
Third question is, Councillor McCall alluded to the issue about wider economic benefits. Do you have any data about the wider economic benefits in terms of hotel users, etc.? We
did a huge survey, but it's now a bit long in the tooth, and it goes back to 2013. It was very impressive about our economic. We haven't done a proper economic survey since the theatre opened, but we do know, we keep in very close touch with, for instance, on the conferencing side, you know, very impressive figures, 124 hotel bed nights, a large number of restaurants in Perth who rely on our activity to keep going, and we keep in close touch with them, and the feedback from them is incredibly positive.
Thanks. I think we'll draw it to a close there because we are so busy. I know that you've got other place to be. So thanks very much for coming along and sharing the progress that's been made. And I'm sure that everybody in here, and I say this every time, wishes you all the best moving forward as an organisation, and just wish you the best for the future. So thanks.
The term is break a leg.
We've got that many invalids with knees and hips being replaced within this chamber that I don't want to even go there. Hello. It doesn't seem like that long ago since you were here the last time, probably months away. So welcome and thanks for coming along. I think that it's yourselves that are going to present a little slideshow.
I'm just actually going to talk. We don't have slides today, unfortunately.
Oh, that's fine. Right, thanks. And if you just introduce yourself, Ellen, because there are some different members here today. And James, you might want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, I'm James Findlay. I'm a board member and run the Strategy and Development Committee of CPK.
And I'm Helen Smout. I'm Chief Executive for Culture, Perth and Kinross. So firstly, I'd like to thank the convener and members of the committee for the opportunity to attend today. The convener had requested an update in 3 key areas for you: our key performance, our fundraising activity, and the opportunities for diversifying our income. I'll briefly cover off each of these, and then you have an opportunity to just ask any questions that you have about that or anything else. We'll answer what we can for you today. So to start, we measure our performance as an organisation in several ways, including the use of key performance indicators. Some of these are set nationally and some are set locally in conversation with the board and also in conversation with the council and particularly our contract monitoring officers, Scott and Fiona. The data that we provide in those KPIs is also supported by engagement processes with communities, with our customers and visitors, with self-evaluation and a process of internal review through our management meetings and team meetings at local levels. We report on this quarterly to the council as part of contract monitoring meetings, and we're now midway through our 4th year of operation. Overall, our performance, I hope, has been very positive. Notable improvement in library usage, where we saw a 1.8% increase in footfall in 2018-19 after a number of years of decline, and continued growth in our online visits and social media engagements in particular. The pattern of declining use in libraries has been levelling off over the last few years, with many sites seeing growth in 2018-19 and further continued growth this year. Whilst lending of e-books continues to form just under 3% of all issues, people are still borrowing books, you might be pleased to hear. There has been significant growth in our e-audio, so talking books, people used to refer to them as. These were up 39.4% in 2018-19, and year to date, they are up 42%. So we're seeing continued growth, and that also reflects a national trend in the publishing world for e-books as well, e-audiobooks. Our e-magazines were up 76% with 15,931 magazines issued electronically in 2018 and 19. Indications for this year are that that trend is continuing, and we have seen a 192% increase in issues following the launch of our new Press Reader app, which you can all access. This is a hot spot for you. You can all access Press Reader. That gives you access to over 700 UK newspaper titles, over 3,200 international titles, and 4,000 magazines. I'm not quite sure how they make the numbers work, but it works for us, and it's an excellent service, and the uptake for that has been very good. In general, trends show that transactional activity is what's moving online. We continue to see year-on-year growth in online visits to our service. Libraries have seen a growth of 4.9% to just over 890,000 visits, and this year we've seen a further 9% increase on those for last year. Online visits to museums have also seen significant growth, with a 217% increase in 2018-19, driven in part by our partnership with Ancestry UK and the ancestral research that people are undertaking, as well as the availability of more digitised content and access to the collections in that way. We continue to communicate with our customers in many ways, including phoning them if the mobile library is not going to make their stop. However, we're increasingly using social media and our online content, web content, to promote service information, news and events. Active engagement in our social media continues to grow. We had 27% increase in 18-19, and October this year was our record ever year, with 150,000 active engagements with our archives alone in the month of October, and 1.5 million engagements year to date this year. We've continued to see significant increases in the number of volunteers working with us, whose time and commitment myself and the board value extremely highly. There are 216 volunteers currently working with us, an increase of 13.6%, and we've seen an increase of around 23% in the number of hours given to us by them. That's had a value of about £110,000 to us last year as an organisation. Year-to-date figures show a further 16% increase in the hours that these volunteers are giving us. Some of that increase is due to the successful City Hall Champions programme that we're running, a group of volunteers who are dedicated to taking the word out about the City Hall developments and the collections and the stories that that will contain into local communities across Perth and Kinross. Customer satisfaction continues to be high. It's consistently over 90% for us, although we're currently reporting a rate of about 91%, slightly down on last year. However, satisfaction as a figure does vary month to month, day to day, activity to activity. So, for example, the recent Jacobite Clans exhibition had satisfaction rating of 95.5% from visitors. And during the time that that exhibition was on, just over 61% of all visitors came into the museum to see that exhibition. We continue to review how and what we collect around satisfaction and how we use that information as a management team and discuss it also as a board. Moving on to talk a little bit about fundraising activity. For us, there are two distinct areas of fundraising. There's ongoing fundraising which supports the day-to-day service development, the activity across all of our areas of activity, and that's achieved through fees, charges, donations, applications to trusts and foundations. And then we have specific fundraising which we are undertaking to support the City Hall and other capital development projects as part of the Cultural Transformation Programme, and for which there is an outline fundraising strategy in place. Whilst we have continued to reduce our year-on-year cost per visit to the organisation, we have also increased the percentage of our income through fundraising. We're still short of our 8% target. We're sitting at around 6.25% at the moment, but that's an increase of 15% on 2017-18. So again, it's a slow and steady climb of the fundraising hill. We do not have a dedicated fundraising function within the organisation. So in this last year, we've been focusing our efforts on diversifying our donations and increasing our success rate with applications to trusts and foundations. We provided training and development for staff in this area, focused the extended management team's attention to the importance of securing funding to allow projects to be delivered. This has paid dividends, and our success rate to date has jumped from 50 to 65% of applications, which is above average for organisations of our type. And since 2016, we have raised just over 680,000 from trusts and foundations, with over £270,000 raised this year alone, an increase of 78% on the amount that we raised for the previous year. These totals exclude the annual award from the Crockett Foundation, which is an ongoing endowment that libraries receive, and the balance of funds from small trusts and foundations that transferred from the council when Culture Perth Kinross was created. We've currently got around about £180,000 worth of applications pending and awaiting the outcome for some of those. Most of those will support some of the conservation of museum collections required before these objects can go on to display long term in the City Hall. Even with that success rate, there's a bit of a health warning in that some funds you can't reapply to within a sort of 3 to 5 year period. We usually have to match fund applications, so that's either in cash or in kind. And the cycle of deadlines for application vary from year to year, so you wouldn't necessarily see the same amount being brought in each year. But we do monitor that and monitor the impact of that on core budgets very carefully. Our donations income has continued to increase. We've increased that by 208%. That was from a very low base when we were a part of the council. And we've got just under £19,000 from donations, basically through boxes in our venues, by the end of October this year. So we're looking to continue that pattern of growth. As the committee will be aware, our opportunities, given the services we deliver to generate income, can be limited. And as well as relying on fundraising, we continue to seek new income streams through which we can generate unreserved funds. We've increased our overall trading income by 27% and removed a £94,000 subsidy to that cafe, which was a historic one. We have increased our charitable income, that generated through those fees and charges mentioned earlier, by 38%. And that's also been helped by a new museum and gallery tax relief, which HMRC introduced in 2017-18 for a 5-year trial period. And we continue to take advantage of that as much as possible. We're also working on the launch of a new membership scheme, which will offer benefits to members, including exclusive access to events, exhibitions, and discount in our shop and cafe offering. And we'll do further iterations of that, including a patron scheme, when we look to launch the City Hall activity. We're working on a programme of evening classes and paid events which will bring in much needed income to the organisation, and we'll launch these late spring next year. And we're looking into the opportunity to provide a premium research offer. We have a large number of researchers who are accessing our services, and if we can take those who are perhaps from more academic institutions or business and offer a premium fast-track service which generates some income from the service, we'll look to do that. We've continued to explore the potential of partnerships and sponsorships with business sector, and have had some success in securing support for events from companies such as Thornton's, who've been very good, William Grant and Sons, and local businesses such as The Venue. However, we need to do more work in this area to attract higher value sponsorship and to maximise the potential opportunities going forward. And we will be engaging with specialist fundraising consultants to help us focus our activity on this area around the City Hall. In the meantime, I've got some brochures for our platform festival where we're looking for business support. So if anybody wants to take one away, if you know of a local business that may want to get involved in supporting that festival, then please do. I've also brought along some short versions of our annual report. The full consolidated accounts and trustees report is available on our website. But if you have any other questions for myself or for James, then happy to answer those as we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. That was quite a full and exhaustive picture snapshot of the organisation and where it is. I can maybe ask in future, and I don't know if the rest of the committee or for myself, it's hard to take in all these figures coming thick and fast, especially when you don't see them in front of you, you don't see a baseline, you don't see, you're looking for movement, and I know that you're articulating it, but if it's tabulated in front of you, it is easier as you're speaking to pick up. And I asked Horsecross to do that the last time because we were just being bombarded with figures. So maybe moving forward, when you come back in sometime in 2020, you could maybe just bring us or share it with us prior to email it to the members of the committee before. That would maybe help the rest of the committee if they would rather have something like that else to read. No comment. Yeah, well, you're going to get it, so that's fine. So do we have any questions for Councillor Drysdale?
Thank you, Convener. First of all, I'd absolutely agree. A veritable blizzard of financial information there, and it's quite difficult to just focus in on what I was looking to hear. And I may have, because of that, I may have missed or misunderstood what you said there about the number of visits in person to libraries, museums and galleries. What you said there sounded positive, sounded as if progress is being made, but I'm looking here at a summary which indicates that in the current year total number of visits to libraries, museums and galleries is down 3.6% as against last year. So, which is the correct picture?
Yes, thank you. I think those were figures to the end of September. Our busiest periods for library activity run October to March. So we start to see the pickup. People don't come into us, sadly, when it's nice and sunny outside. So this summer we see a bit of a dip. So what we are looking at in terms of the growth figures, the 1.8% increase in library usage was for last year based on previous years, and at the moment we've got 11 out of 13 libraries where we're seeing a continued increase, and there are 3 libraries that are just at the moment in a kind of flat line, which is giving rise to some of that figure. But again, when we project across the rest of the year, then we're hoping that we'll continue that levelling off and small, but for us significant push forward.
Thank you. Just a further follow-up, not a follow-up actually, I did a separate question, if I may, which is, again, you spoke in some detail about the efforts on income generation. Two words I didn't hear in that, and again, I may have missed it. Three words. Individual legacy giving. Is that something that has been explored? Is that something that is an option for people who may wish to leave something to CPK in their will?
Yes, we have done some work with local solicitors on individual giving, but it's a long play because you're talking to people who perhaps are making wills very, many years down before we see a return on that. But we do get legacy giving, and it is an area of growth in the museum sector generally. Not so much for museums, for libraries or for archives, although we have just had a legacy which has come into the council to support the archive and local and family history. So it is something that we continue to look at, and we'll be doing more of that as we progress our plans, particularly around the new City Hall and Perth Museum and Art Gallery developments.
Recently, the Hamish Matters Festival in Blairgowrie has been using the library in conjunction there, and there's also the Eco Museum project going forward. How's Culture Perth and Kinross engaging with these projects, obviously projects like that elsewhere in Perth and Kinross?
Yes, thanks. So we work with as many projects as we have capacity to work with. With these projects in particular, as you mentioned, the Hamish Matters Festival, we worked quite closely to support the organising committee. In fact, our librarian in Blairgowrie sits on that committee and support that as we do with the Blairgowrie Museum Group in helping them put on their displays. And the Eco Museum and working with Catherine's Commonwealth projects, we have run joint projects. We did a 100 Objects project where we had that on display at Ailith Museum. So as there is opportunity to work together and where we can work together positively to mutual benefit, then we will always look to do that.
Thanks. If there's no other questions, Helen, I'd like to thank you. It looks as though you've got a solid organisation there, looking at all the figures, and I know that it's a difficult one to grow, and if you're able to stand still, you're doing well. And so I think everybody in this room will congratulate the work that CPK is doing, and we just hope you've managed to continue it, and hopefully you will manage to achieve these incremental rises in footfall. So thanks very much for coming along. Do you have anything to add to it?
I'm going to say three additional things. Firstly, as a board, we feel we have a very strong management team, great quality in key positions led by Helen, but not certainly finishing their real enthusiasm throughout the area. Secondly, just to pick up something from the document, I'm afraid it's more figures that our annual report. Since April 2016, and these figures are now slightly out of date, we received just over 770,000 from trusts and foundations. But the important number is of which 410,000 would not have come without us being an independent trust. So I'll just give you those figures again. 770,000 we've received. Now that figure's gone up, and Helen gave you a slightly higher figure, but 410, so that's over half of which has come because we're an independent allié. So we are, and certainly in the Strategy and Development Committee, we're continuing to work very hard at trying to increase that legacy. And although we are going to continue to be dependent and significantly dependent upon the council, we have that firmly in mind. As was, I think our fundraising was reported in detail to the programme board meeting yesterday. And thirdly, I would say that we are doing our best to diversify our income sources and raise funding, but it's a point I've raised before with the continuing review hanging over us. That does frustrate us and me personally. Anyway, thank you very much.
I'm afraid we'll not be doing much about that review at this committee.
But it's a factor. But and I should also say that, and reiterate with Helen, that for we are cooperating closely with the council for trying to promote fundraising for the major new projects that we're bringing forward. And that seems to be working well in cooperation with them.
Thank you.
At this point, I'll hand over to Councillor Parrott for Live Active Leisure. They'll be sitting outside, probably. They'll probably be there. All right. Okay. It's like, there's not a lot with CPK. They're just going to channel along Paul Cromwell.
Okay, so I find out about
give you a minute to settle down. Thanks, Paul.
Have you got a wingman coming? No, just yourself. I could have been over on the other side. Board member.
Okay, good afternoon, Paul. Thank you very much for coming along today to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. I think we've asked you in particular to update on the LAL's contribution to the health and wellbeing agenda in Perth and Kinross and the review of your key performance indicators. And thank you very much for the pack that you've provided. If you'd like to present to us, and then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Excuse me. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit already. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity once again to attend the Scrutiny Committee this afternoon. The company's chairman, Mike Robertson, had planned to be here, but unfortunately, at very late notice, work commitment has arisen, and therefore he has sent his apologies. So I'm afraid it's just me this afternoon. As requested, I will touch on the company's key performance at this stage of the year, and will also provide an overview of the company's health and wellbeing offer. But as they say, as a picture paints 1,000 words, I also have a short video which I would like to show you, which I think very much reflects some of the outstanding work being done and the real health impact being delivered for members of our community. So in terms of the company's performance, probably the key indicator is its overall financial performance. And I'm pleased to confirm that at the end of Q2, the company is hitting its overall net budget target. Whilst this is a positive position, and at this stage we do anticipate that our full year outturn will also hit target, it is perhaps worth mentioning that the positive contributors to the budget thus far this year has been a very good first half performance from our trading company, and in particular some of the one-off bookings that we've managed to attract at Jewess Centre this year. Additionally, and quite unusually this year, we have seen quite a higher than typical staff turnover, and this has also resulted in a one-off short-term gain through staff slippage. However, income generated from sport and activity is down on target and overall continues to be a challenging area for us. The success of the company's membership scheme is obviously essential to the financial health of the organisation and contributes approximately 25% of our customer-generated income. Its success also represents the recognised value for money that it provides our communities. Despite the challenging environment, the membership scheme has realised an approximate 5% increase within the first 6 months year on year. And this performance also supports the decision the company made last year to appoint its first dedicated membership sales advisor. Positive customer experience is obviously vital to us in the service industry, and one of our customer promises is that we want your experience to be great. And the most recent survey, customer surveys completed in April, of which we had 480 responses, provided a response that showed that 80% of our customers considered their experience to be good or excellent. We are currently reviewing an improved methodology of engaging with customers in relation to customer satisfaction so that we are able to capture performance data on a much more real-time basis. It is of course envisaged that this will lead to service improvements. Reflecting on my earlier comment regarding the challenges in sport and income, the total visits and attendances to LAL venues at the end of Q2 is approximately 600,000 and is around 10,000 less than the previous year. This drop can be attributed to a number of factors, but the significant areas are there continues to be increased competition, particularly in the area of fitness gyms and group exercise, and that is very apparent in particular in Perth City. Our sports hall usage, which is reflecting national trends, continues on a slight decline, particularly indoor five-a-side, where the trend and preference for football and teams now is far more discerning than it probably was historically, with a move towards sport-specific surfaces, which provides a much more improved playing environment. And of course, the number of venues that the company operates has reduced over the course of this last year, which has also had an impact on the total attendance figures. Concession attendances, visits, and numbers of individuals using their concessions cards is also down on previous year, but it is on target. The company's concession scheme is designed to support any member of our community that receives recognised support in relation to their income levels and provides discounted access to all of our services. A reduction in concession uptake perhaps also can reflect the stronger local economy and the employment figures. But this is an area we intend to review over the course of the next few months to ensure that our scheme is fully reflective and supportive of the outcomes that we are trying to achieve. The number of registered clubs utilising venues has increased by 12.5%. Now registered with PACES, that's increased significantly over the year. PACES is the Perth Kinross Accredited Club Excellence Scheme, which has been successfully promoted and supported by our sports development team over the last 18 months. This scheme provides a range of benefits and assurances for the clubs, including support on child protection, appropriate risk assessment, club coaching opportunities, and discounted access to venues and facilities. And finally, I will also mention that we are hitting targets on the number of community sports hubs developed as agreed with our funding partners, Perth Kinross Council and Sports Scotland. Our officers will now continue to work with the hubs to develop their objectives and development plans. I would also highlight that the success of the hubs reflects our community's positive attitude to volunteering and making a collective impact in their localities. Moving on to health and wellbeing offer. I will perhaps start by stating that I consider that everything we do to be part of our health and wellbeing offer. The universal leisure offer that we provide in our venues, from fitness classes, gyms, swimming, kids' activities, holiday programs, all provide the essential opportunities for people to be active. Have fun, get fit, socialise with friends. These venues are at the hearts of our communities and provide a vital role in delivering on our health and wellbeing offer. We need to ensure that we continue to develop our services and activities we deliver to encourage continue and more regular visits to the centres. Of course, we know that some people find attending venues more challenging, and this might be due to a range of different factors. And this is where our dedicated wellbeing team are active. They're in our communities and they're delivering and developing accessible programmes. We work with a wide range of partners, including NHS Tayside, Macmillan Cancer Support, Garnicky Trust, and the Perth Kinross Council Health and Social Care team. And with that, we have developed a range of projects targeted to help those people in our communities who require that additional support. Just to touch on a few of the projects which have been developed. the All Ability Cycling Project, which many of you be aware of, that operates from Bell Sports Centre on the Inch. And there's also now an extension of that at Crieff at the community campus. This project has been developed with, again, a wide range of different partners and continues to be a great success. Further funding has recently been secured, which will purchase 2 new side-by-side bikes and a semi-recumbent bike, which will help those customers with postural issues in the back and lower limbs. The Perth Kinross Macmillan Move More programme. These programmes support clients who are affected by cancer. The team have now delivered over 120 referrals, 50 this year, and 12 of the participants attending the Move More sessions have taken out our Next Stage Connect membership and have moved to independent exercise. 8 of those individuals have returned to work during their time within the programme. Now, I may, if it's okay, at this time I would like to show you a very short video of one of our customers and hear from them on their experience and interaction with our wellbeing team.
Okay, so I found out about the programme and coming to the gym through my pharmacist, Alistair Shearer. He used to come out to my house every fortnight to discuss my medication and stuff. And yeah, so he set up an interview with Ian, and we had to talk about what the possibilities were going forward from there. So after a discussion with Ian, I was a bit sceptical. Obviously, getting ill, I'd put a lot of weight on. My mobility wasn't and isn't very good, but working on not doing stuff that includes my back, Ian explained that we can work around everything and try and get stronger up top and stuff like that. So I was kind of sceptical, gave it a go, and now we're a year later, and it's working absolutely fantastic for me. So yeah. So my journey started back in 2011. I got married in February. 3 months later, or just around that time, I became ill, and I was bedbound. I ended up bedbound for probably the majority of that year. I couldn't even get out of bed to go to the toilet and stuff like that. So after several appointments with the doctor, we had an MRI scan which revealed that I had multi-level degenerative disc disease, multiple major disc bulges and severe sciatica. So it kind of spiraled me into a kind of give up attitude. And that lasted a while until my wife kind of gave me a bit of an ass kicking. My friends, and I think something came up for TV. They put me forward for it, and I got a phone call from ITV, and I was, Channel 4, and ended up on the TV singing live. So it was a dream come true with that.
From Perth, it's Owen Wilson.
I'm down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burden me.
And then on looking on that back, it was only seeing myself on TV that I realised how heavy I'd gotten and how possibly dangerous it could have been. So I decided then that I needed to start losing weight, and I was writing music and doing stuff. So along with that, I had to try and make appearance better, and I had some real bad times. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to do anything. I pushed everyone away. I wasn't a nice person to be around, and it was time to sort it out, you know. And so I started losing the weight, and I lost quite a bit at that point. And then this programme came and, well, it saved my life. To this point, I've lost just over 7 stone. And it's possible for anyone to do it, you know. It's hard. Some days you don't want to do it. But anyone with any mental health, physical disabilities, anything, you can overcome anything just by take a day out, just do it, just do something. Come and speak to somebody at the gym. They're great, everybody here is great. And it can change your life. So over the last year, I've gone from being in the gym a day a week with Ian and doing some light weights, getting used to sitting right, concentrating everything on, or focusing on what's wrong with me or a particular person, and working around that so that things can be easier achieved, and you know, makes life a bit easier as well. So we started doing light weights and stuff, and me being quite stubborn, I wanted to get my feet stuck right in. So I'm doing it 5 days a week now. I'm eating really good. I'm in the gym and working hard, right up to the point now that I'm lifting weights that I never thought I would ever be able to lift, never mind a year ago. I use the recumbent bike, which I'm not supposed to use, and I'm knocking out 20 laps, and I never thought I'd ever do that. They said I would never do most of these things, but I'm doing them. It doesn't stop my illness, doesn't stop me being sore, but I can still lift the weights, I can still do the job, but it's on my terms. So until now, everything has changed, everything, you know. All of these things around, no matter what ability you have, there's something here that will work for you. And it's completely changed my life, 100% completely changed my life. So my medication levels are very serious. To be clear on it, on a daily basis I take over 20 tablets. And a bottle of morphine a week I go through. I take amitriptyline, I take diazepam, Lyrica, ibuprofen, so many medication. Due to losing all the weight, I am expecting to drop medicine levels because I can feel them working more now that I've lost some weight, so which is a really good thing. Obviously all the drugs that are not good for the system, and over 6 years it's probably had its fair wear and tear in that. But working out, getting fitter, getting better, feeling better can reduce, it'll never fix the illness, but it'll make me feel better, and it's completely made me feel better. But the medication hopefully can be reduced and continue to do that to the lowest possible level, and I'll still be able to do what I'm doing. This programme is by far the best thing I've ever done in my life. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's completely saved my life. The guys here are fantastic. They completely look after you. Ian's the man. It's completely changed my life. There's nothing in your life you can't overcome. Nothing. It doesn't matter what's wrong with you, whatever. Come and try something in one of the classes. I've done it. I've lost loads of weight. I'm feeling the best I've ever felt. There's so much opportunity here. It's not all about lifting weights. There's a lot of other stuff that can be done around your own illness or disability. You don't have to sit in your ass. You can change your life. You've just got to want to do something better than what you've done.
Ian is the man. So I'm delighted to say Ian's been with us for about 15 years, and actually Ian's just been promoted to being our wellbeing manager. but his experience and attitude is really going to do him well going into his new role. The wellbeing team have a lot of these stories, I have to say. This isn't an isolated case in any shape or form, and that is probably very symptomatic of the wellbeing team. There's a lot of staff resource and it's quite intense going into it, but what it does is has a massive impact on less people, fewer people, but huge impacts on those people. So I hope you found that video interesting. What I hope it demonstrates is not only the impact that our teams are able to support in relation to health improvement, but also evidences the positive engagement with partners. It was a pharmacist that was social prescribing, exercise prescribing, and delivering just real impact for individuals. I hope it also clearly shows the integrated relationship that there is in terms of what I said at the start, which is our wellbeing programs are also integrated. Yes, we have wellbeing programs that are out in our communities, outside venues, but they also link very strongly and very directly to the venues that we have and that we offer. So our challenge is, of course, to continue to grow and develop the programs. New evidence, as everybody's aware, you watch the news most nights, there's new evidence always is emerging on a weekly basis demonstrating the positive impact that physical activity has, not only on our physical, but also our mental well-being. And as policies are developed to tackle these challenges, Live Active Leisure will continue to engage with partners, to advocate for the benefits of exercise and physical activity, and we'll continue to proactively try to secure funding, which is, of course, essential for this work to continue. Finally, for me, I've just said I have handed out a folder. Now, within this folder, there are many other cases, sort of case studies and also updates in terms of the various projects that our wellbeing team delivers on. And again, happy to take questions either during this or even after this meeting if anybody has any questions or any queries on any of it. Thank you.
Paul, thanks you very much for that presentation and quite inspiring video. Before I open the floor up for questions, I've got one myself, if I may. I notice one normally looks for targets going up, but I notice that your targets for overall attendances for concessionary sports and the number of unique users of concessionary sport, those targets are actually going down. What is the explanation for that? Because I would have thought that the number of people who might be entitled to concessions is static or rising. Thanks.
I think that's one of the ones. I mean, obviously we promote our concessions very much. We want people that have got barriers in terms of income related issues. We want to be able to provide them with a discount. We provide that. We promote that. We promote it through all our different agencies. But yes, there has been a decline this year, and there was a decline last year. So you could look at it and say, well, yes, is the local economy stronger? Therefore, is unemployment levels improving? And therefore, we have less incidents of people requiring that concession. So there's that element of it as well. But I think, as I've said during my presentation, I think it's an area we now need to look at. The fact that we've had now a couple of years of drop, it still provides a very wide range in offer, and in terms of a monetary discount, it's quite significant in terms of the number of uses we have. But we want to make sure that it's actually fitting the purpose we want, which is making sure that we're getting access to people that where cost is a barrier. So we are going to look at that over the course of the next few months and obviously consult with various partners in terms of their views on it and in terms of how we can deliver something different going forward.
Can I just ask, I appreciate the concessions, I understand them, but where do you actually promote them? How do people find out what they're potentially entitled to?
Yeah, we work obviously with the local authority very closely. There's a range of agencies that work with the local authority in SLA. So we have a thing called Compass Card, which is put through that, which provides free access for the first few months and then £1 a visit after that. We have the wider concession scheme, which is obviously just promoted generally as part of our website and promoted across all of our venues and every way we possibly can. We provide carer support and that type of thing as well. So in terms of all the different areas that are impacted by it, we proactively promote the scheme. And as I say, alongside that, we also have a separate offer, which working with the council and the various agencies the council works with.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and Paul, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm particularly interested in the social prescribing and the benefits thereof, as opposed to medication. And there's a case in point that we've just heard. you'll be aware, because I understand that you're already engaging constructively with Morna Simpkins from the MS Society.
Yes.
And she has written to myself and I think to other elected members as well in relation to a suggestion, a statement, if you like, that personal independence payment is not a valid benefit with active leisure. Can you clarify that? Is that the case or is it not? And if it is not a valid benefit, is that not deterring those on low incomes from engaging in the benefits that we've seen?
I have engaged with the Chief Executive of the MS Society on this issue. Now, as the current concession scheme stands, PIP is not a recognised concession because PIP is not means tested and it's not based on an individual having or being able to demonstrate that they have income challenge. PIP, in some ways, and certainly the advice we've had is obviously if you receive a PIP allowance, people could potentially use that allowance to access physical activity as part of the use of that allowance to support their well-being. So it's not an area that's currently included because the current concession scheme is based on ability to pay, and that's the raison d'etre for the concession scheme. But I think, as I've mentioned earlier, we are recognising, and I've obviously spoken at length with the MS Society on this, and that's why I do think that, amongst other discussions that I've had, and obviously given the fact that there has been a bit of a drop, it's time for us to have a look at it and see, well, how does this scheme and access scheme suit people going forward?
Councillor Reid.
What impact will your withdrawal from Achterarder have on your targets for the future?
Obviously, the positive side of that is the fact that the facility is still there, and that's those usages are continuing. So that in terms of actual impact on the local area, in terms of health, and then obviously we think that that's in place, and we continue to support the local hub group in terms of their endeavours, in terms of operating CSA. But yes, obviously, as part of that drop in 10,000, is obviously there's a portion of that that's going to be attributed to the fact that we no longer operate the CSA, and the figures that are being generated at CSA are no longer part of LAL's portfolio. But like I say, the positive side of it is that those figures will be reported elsewhere, and what we still have is that activity being supported in the local area.
Well, just a comment. Owen's story just highlights the absolute hazards, potential hazards, as Councillor Drysdale has alluded to, of prescribing opiates for non-malignant pain. And I think if Owen had had social prescribing at the start, it would have been sorted out 7 years ago. And I think this is a case that the general practitioners and pain clinic physicians need to look at closely in their prescribing, inappropriate prescribing of opiates and benign disease.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCall.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Convener. I have 2.5 questions, if I may. One is actually very related to yours that you raised, and I think we've discussed this before. It's about the overall attendance by girls and women. That seems to be on quite a marked downward trajectory. And I think the last time we spoke about this, there was going to be some further analysis or consideration to try and understand if there's a demographic issue or it's a location issue. So I'd be quite interested in knowing what, if anything, has been developed around that to understand what is the barrier, I suppose, to women and girls' attendance being at least maintained and if not increasing.
Well, I have to say that was one I didn't pick, not because necessarily the figure's gone down, but simply because, unfortunately, there is an issue with that number while I've been reviewing and preparing for this presentation. So, because obviously, if you notice, it's down quite a significant number, but our actual overall attendance isn't. And so what we have there, there's a slight anomaly there, which I'm still investigating, and I'm happy to come back to the committee in terms of what that looks like. Obviously, in terms of girls and women, we have a lot of a range of exercise programs. We have support for mothers pre and postnatal. We have reintroducing back into exercise classes. We do buggy fits. So we do a whole range of activities which are supporting young mums and also typically women that engage in sort of group fitness exercise and that type of thing. Our numbers are very comparable, to be honest, on an overall perspective in terms of men and women and girls and boys. And obviously in terms of our active schools, again, I haven't mentioned that simply because the second term for active schools runs up to the end of December, so we only have a very small amount of data to compare at this moment. But obviously there's also a focus in terms of the active schools programs in terms of focusing on teenage girls and ensuring that their take-up continues.
Thank you. I would, Vice Convener, if that's acceptable to you, to have perhaps a bit more detailed analysis behind that, I think would be helpful. My second question really is actually related to Councillor Drysdale's question around concessions. I wasn't aware of the PIP, for example, but I do know that the All Ability Cycling I know a number of people who have accessed that, partly because I've told them about it, and found it very helpful. And I think there are some sessions that are free of charge to use, but then there's some other sessions that perhaps are a more accessible time, that there's a fee attached to that. And these are people who perhaps don't have the Compass card, but do have disabilities of one kind or another. So I'm just wondering how that's being funded, because I know currently you get some community funding for that. And what's the longevity likely to be, and whether or not, what the criteria is to be able to access that if you're on a particular type of disability benefit.
Again, disability in itself isn't something that's considered is part of our concession scheme, because again, it's not based on ability to pay. Where we work, we have a Compass membership card, which I'd mentioned earlier, which is particularly for groups that have an SLA with the local authority, and where those people haven't typically used venues before, haven't been an LAL customer before. Therefore, what we're trying to do is transition people into actually getting active and starting to use our facilities and our services. So as part of that, there's a discount, which is a £1 per visit, or it's free to begin with, and after then 3 months, it's £1 per visit for the remainder of the year. As part of that, we also have such a thing called a Connect membership. So again, that was something that I think that Owen went on to. So after people have been through, for example, our activity referral program, which is usually a 12-week course, which is again subsidised in terms of cost, they can go onto a membership scheme, which is only £10 a month, which again, if it's been used a couple of times a week, provides outstanding value. So we do have a range of mechanisms to support people where income is a challenge, or where trying to get people back into exercise has been proven to be a challenge in terms of doing that. But as I said earlier, I do recognise that in terms of our concession scheme, it's something that we perhaps need to have a look at quite soon.
Thank you. And in the absence of any more questions, I think with time moving on, I'll draw the session to a close. Paul, thank you very much for coming along. Thank you for a very positive presentation and positive answers to the questions. And we look forward to seeing you in the routine cycle. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, now everybody's returned. I think we'll move on to paper number 5, which is the Beamut report for Housing and Environment. And I'm going to, without further ado, pass it over to Barbara to introduce the report. This report's already been to committee before. It's now come to Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not going to say very much more than that, apart from to say that it is an exceptions report and highlights some of the key outcomes we've achieved in the delivery of a very wide and diverse range of vital services for the Perth and Kinross area. And I'm more than happy with my colleague Carol Hendry to answer any questions the committee may have.
Well, I'll open it to the floor. Are there any questions on this? Most of the members here will have seen this paper at some point earlier in the cycle. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I was just looking for an update. There's a comment on page 4 of the report, page 19 of our papers, that our contributions to these, the Tay Cities deal is working towards full deal status by mid-November. It is progressing well. Obviously now we have a general election. Do we have an update on the timing of the finalisation of the Tay Cities deal?
No, I don't. Councillor Drysdale, obviously, because of the general election, then, you know, the timing of that has been pushed back, but it's, you know, sort of, so it will be early next year at the earliest.
Any further questions on the report for Barbara or our team? We'll get there if there's no more questions. Councillor Barnacle.
It's not really, well, I see on page 12 of the report the percentage of antisocial behaviour complaints resolved. It just so happens that yesterday I was with the police in Kinross who've been doing drop-in sessions, and I asked them what the main concern was, and they said it was virtually completely about antisocial behaviour amongst young people in Kinross and Milner Thorpe. So I was looking for ways that we might address that, and one of the things that they said was that the campus at Lochleven was not open as much as it should be. It was difficult to get access to facilities for informal social engagement. So I was really asking how I might address that as local member through, you know, being a bit more flexible with campus operation and liaison with the school. It's not really connected completely with this report, but it will obviously feed back to you because it is an issue that's been raised locally.
Councillor Barnacle, all I can suggest is that perhaps after this committee or sometime out with this committee, you raise that particular issue with me and I'll look into the matter for you.
Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Convener. I'm just picking up particularly on the 2 performance indicators that are not yet on target. I noticed that the rent figure that we have is for August 2019, and that shows a slight decline against previous experience. I'm just wondering whether we're aware of any change to that figure, hopefully in a positive direction as the autumn has gone on. Thanks.
Housing and Communities Committee earlier, you know, sort of, well, in October, had a paper about the implications and the impact of universal credit, particularly in terms of rent and rent arrears. So we continue to monitor it. I've been asked to bring back a further paper to the next committee in January. You know, sort of, but what we're experiencing is pretty much the same as any other local authority. You know, sort of in terms of that, but we have got a very robust, you know, sort of approach in place. So it will be, you know, sort of at this level or slightly lower. And as if by magic, yep, it is actually gone up a little bit. So in September it was 96.82%, and in October it was 97.19%. So it has improved, but we are, as I say, we were asked to bring back the action plan, you know, sort of that we're, you know, sort of following to try and address the issues.
Thank you, Rog.
Thank you, Convener. Got this lighting up the first time. Again, on page 26 of our report, in terms of the performance indicators, I noticed that 35% of the performance indicators are classified as being not yet or not measurable at this point. Perhaps for the purposes of this committee, it might be helpful to explain why over a third of the performance indicators are not measurable at this point, and how many of those will be measurable at some point. Thank you.
This is an annual problem that we have, you know, sort of as we're reporting, you know, sort of in a 6-month cycle. The remainder of the performance indicators are normally only collected once a year, and that collection once a year will fall out with the 6-month period of this report. So there is always an expectation that we will be able to provide that in the full annual performance report that will be tabled, sort of in May or June time next year.
Questions? We'll go to comments. And Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. My comment is a very general comment. It's just querying why this paper comes before this committee, how much value we offer in being able to scrutinise it, given that it's been before a number of other committees. And I wonder, given that we've got about 10 other items on the agenda, if this is a good use of our time.
I think that they've always come to this committee, haven't they? And is it necessary, or has it always been convention that they come, Lisa?
I think in the past, as a matter of course, that they've always come before scrutiny. However, the Scrutiny Committee will know from the work that we've been doing in terms of looking at the revised remit, that the remit of scrutiny is going to become much more focused around scrutiny and performance. And it is hoped that going forward, performance reports that may or may not go to the themed committees will come to scrutiny first. And we're starting to see that. However, we're still in the transition period in terms of the diary scheduling. We're still working on last year's diary schedule. So as we go forward for the new Council and Committee schedule, what we hope to do is time that so that performance information and reports come to this committee first, and that leaves the Scrutiny Committee to fulfil their role to make any comments and observations that can then be fed back to either the themed committees or, in the case of other performance reports, to Council or SPNR.
Thanks. Councillor McEwan.
Just a general comment. Within the last month or so, it's in the report that we were able to meet with Kevin Stewart, the Housing Minister, in Blackthorn Place and show the houses there to residents. And obviously for the last couple of weeks I've been able to take the opportunity to actually visit these homes, and the residents I spoke to are all very happy with their homes, and especially around the ability to heat their homes a lot cheaper than the homes they originally came from, and it's something that they actually were very grateful of the council for the quality and the type of homes that we're now building.
Thanks. I'm sure everybody applauds that as well. And again, we have to be building homes to be more heat efficient as we tackle the climate emergency as well. So thanks for those comments. If there's no other comments, can we note the report? Thank you. Without further ado, we'll then move on to paper 6, which is the Education and Children's Services Interim Performance Summary. Much the same as a comparison against the BMIP as the last one. This paper has already been at other various committees as well, and I'll ask Sheena if she wants to introduce the report.
Nothing really further to say, Convener, other than it is an interim update report similar to Housing and Environment's update. There will be performance indicators that the data is not available. That's purely down to the time of year and when that kind of information is available. And it presents areas where we have exceeded our targets, but also focuses on areas where we haven't.
Thanks for that, Sheena. Are there any questions on this report?
Thank you. It's just a comment on page 48. There's 91% of parents are happy with the school they attend, which leaves 9% which are unhappy. And I just wondered whether the dissatisfaction from that 9% is about one particular issue or spread over a number of issues?
In relation to the percentage feedback, Councillor Ahern, across Perth and Kinross, we have very high levels of return, and within those high levels of return perform very highly. So it is a very small percentage, as you've indicated. And what we're finding from school to school is that there's not necessarily great consistency, but it will possibly be things like where parents don't feel sufficiently involved in the school development planning, for example, that kind of thing. And it's a range of other issues, but that tends to be one not just in Perth and Kinross, but actually across the piece, where returns tend to be lower than in other areas.
Yeah, I probably should have said that the percentages are really good, and I've in no way criticising. There's always another side, and I just wondered whether that was a particular issue, but no, the figures are excellent.
Thanks for that comment as well.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the report. My question really is on page 51, and I did raise this before at the Housing and Communities Committee, and it's about the section or the indicator on statutory criminal justice social work. And as far as I understand it, that is mainly in relation to adult social work. And I'm intrigued, and I'm still not fully understanding why that's included as part of lifelong learning performance indicators. So perhaps an explanation or some clarity around that would be helpful.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCall. The reason that this is included within the Education and Children's Services Business Management Improvement Plan is that Criminal Justice Services are sitting under my management as Chief Social Work Officer. But the current scheme of administration is that criminal justice and aspects of the Community Justice Partnership are reported to Housing and Communities. But we're keen to make sure that activity is included within our service planning across ECS, which is why it's within our BMIP, and our commitments and improvement plans are sitting within a single business management and improvement plan for ECS, which includes criminal justice. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. It does seem counterintuitive, I have to confess, that it sits in and it goes to lifelong learning. And I suppose my follow-up question, if I may, Convener, is what other information or what other reports that come from the Criminal Justice Service or that particular aspect of adult social work are also produced, because I've not seen any of them coming to Housing and Communities.
I think that's an area that we are considering in terms of the governance for criminal justice social work services and where that's reporting to. And certainly within the council, we have a discussion on the 3rd of December at the executive officer team about that very matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
'18, 2019 is at 8, and the target is 9. Is that because it's a part year, or?
It's just we're exceeding the target, so we're doing better than expected.
I was just wondering also why the target was 9 when the performance was 6 the year before.
I'll ask James to talk us through why the targets are as they are.
Yeah, thank you. The targets are constantly under review, and we tend to look at, although that amount of information isn't there, we look at them on a longer term trend. The target at 9 is a sort of steady target at the moment. There was a drop in 2017-18, but perhaps evidenced by the result in 2018-19. The view then was that it was too soon to assume that was a sustained reduction, and we left the target at 9 to see what the longer term trend was like, and it has come up again slightly last year, and we'll certainly look at that at the end of this year to see whether that reduction has been maintained, and we can then look at reducing the target. But it's also we have to be very careful, in particular with the primary level exclusions target, because the numbers are significantly lower in primary, and you need to be very wary of kind of taking a knee-jerk reaction, I suppose, to small-term short-term changes, and reacting with long-term targets to small variations. But we definitely we do take that into consideration, and they will be reviewed on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parra.
Thank you. I'm on the very last page, page 52, just to ask, is the revised date for the raising attainment strategy simply so that it aligns sensibly with the introduction of other policies? Thanks.
Councillor Parrott, it is, and it's also to take into account some national work that is underway with Education Scotland that is expected to be published in February 2020 that we would want to take cognizance of as well when developing the new strategy.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, are there any comments on the report? No comments. Can we note the report? Thank you, Sheena and Jackie. And yourself. Swiftly moving on to paper number 7. This is the same report on. I had it down as Lisa. Introduce it.
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Sorry, Karen, I wasn't finished there. In my prompts, it said it was Lisa. It was going to be introducing it, but yes, it will be. So this is the report is for the Corporate Democratic Services, and this is the first time it's seen the light of day at this committee. So I'll pass over to Karen to introduce it.
Thank you very much. The report before you today is the interim report for the Corporate and Democratic Services Business Management and Improvement Plan. It highlights the key improvement actions that we are taking to promote good governance across the Council, support our communities, commission culture and sports services, and ultimately support other services to contribute to the Council's strategic objectives. The report is a different format to the other services. It reflects the work that we carry out across all of the divisions within Corporate and Democratic Services. And the style of the report is to give you an update on each of the improvement actions that we committed to undertake, and a full report on all of our activity will be provided at the year end. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Karen, on page 64 of the report, it's about the Tayside Procurement Consortium in Scotland Excel. Do we monitor that regularly to see that what we are procuring through these bodies is actually the best value?
Yes, there is regular monitoring of the activity through Tayside Procurement Consortium. The Council is a member of the board, and we have a senior officer on that, and there are regular reports that do come to the Council in that respect. I think the other aspect of the action there is in relation to the collaborative work that's happening, which is trying to take a fresh approach to the benefits that could be available through a different approach to procurement across the 3 councils and Tayside contracts.
Thanks. Do we ever do any blind sampling by going out and asking in the marketplace how much something would cost and comparing it with what we would pay for the same items through this procurement service?
I don't have that level of detail. I'm happy to find the answer to that question for you.
Thank you, because you'd think it would be prudent just to check that the deal that we're receiving through Scotland Excel or the Tayside Procurement Consortium isn't being bettered out there in the marketplace. You can.
I think it's also worth mentioning at the moment that Tayside Procurement Consortium and that whole service is currently the subject of a wider review across the 3 councils that are part of the Tayside Consortium. So we're looking to do a whole-scale review of our procurement approach, and as part of that we'll be challenging the value for money and whether or not there's different operating models. And there's an extensive piece of work that's currently underway that will be reported to Council in due course.
Thanks for that. Any other questions, Councillor Hearn?
Thank you very much. My question is related to the maximising the use of new technology to deliver services, and in particular to Perth Park High School. And I just wondered, maybe too early yet, whether we've got any feedback as to the new digital learning and the way it's been done in the high school, different than we do in the other schools?
Is that the information that's referred to on page 65, Councillor Ahern?
Yes, it is. I'm just interested, now we're using a new technology, a new way of learning in Bertha Park High School, whether it may well be too early because it's only been going for, is it, 1 term now? I just wondered if there was any initial feedback.
What we're doing is we're working in conjunction with colleagues in UHI to actually undertake a piece of longitudinal research for us on the impact of using technology in the way that they are currently doing in Bertha Park High School, and to see if there is any demonstrable impact, particularly on pupils' attainment and progress with learning. So you're right, at this stage it's too early to give any indication, other than what we do have a number of young learners who are very enthusiastic about the differences, but beyond that there's nothing tangible to be able to report.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions? Councillor Parrott.
One, if I may, looking at page 63 of the report, you make mention of the identification of council employees who are non-UK EU nationals. Do we have any figures on the degree of ease with which those individuals have achieved settled status under the new arrangements, and has the council been involved in assisting any employees to gain that status? Thanks.
At this point in time, I don't have an update on the number of employees who have actually gone forward to obtain settled status. I don't have that information. We do know that within our workforce we have 123 employees who are non-UK EU nationals. And we have been providing assistance and information through the Ethnic Minorities Law Group, and we've had several consultations for staff which have been popular. So it's still work in progress in terms of collating that information on the number who've actually gone forward to obtain settled status. But the council has been providing that support. We will continue to do so, and we will have an update on numbers at a point in the future.
Are the 123 staff, are they concentrated in one area of service, or are they more evenly spread throughout various services?
The employees are spread throughout all services. We have identified the locations for these staff, so that the executive director and managers at a local level can be alert to any potential risks. But there is nothing of a significant risk that we've identified across any of our services. But we have made sure that that information is shared at a local level, so that we can be alert to any potential impact on recruitment or retention at a date in the future. But in terms of impact on workforce, we're recognising this is a very low risk for Perth and Kinross Council.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener. I just perhaps, if I may, first of all make a comment on the question that you raised about procurement. It's probably good practice to do a value or best value review before deciding which consortium to go with, unless there's some other mandatory inclusion requirement. So I would expect and hope that that's been undertaken anyway. My question is one that I've asked before about my PKC, but not at this forum. So for the purpose of completeness, it's on page 6 of your report, and it's about the availability of services online. And since I've asked at previous meetings, perhaps it might be helpful just to ensure that I understand now from previous answers that there is plans in place to look at how residents and citizens of Perth and Kinross who don't have online access for whatever reason, either through digital connectivity or because of some sort of either physical impairment or social impairment or social challenges, that we can find ways of reaching all of our citizens. So perhaps it might be helpful, or you can give us some idea of when that might kick in and when that review of how those services can be delivered so it reaches everybody, when that will be achieved or what the timelines are.
Okay, I'm happy to answer that question and supplement what was indicated this morning during strategic policy and resources. So as well as a channel shift to moving more services online, we are continuing to provide other methods for individuals who have challenges in accessing those digital methods. So there is assisted digital, and there is also face-to-face that's still available. So that continues, and we will continue to look at as more services move online to ensure that we actually have alternative arrangements in place. So it's about knowing your customers and understanding their needs and making sure that there are alternative means so that everybody can access the services that they require.
Thank you, Karen. And is there a sort of timeline for achieving this?
Well, the programme of putting services online is an ongoing process. So there is a plan set out of how services will move online where that's appropriate to do so. And when that happens, there are alternative channels and arrangements being made for those with disabilities or those who don't have connectivity. So that's an ongoing process. I'm happy to make available a timeline of the next phase of services that are moving online. I can get that to you out with the committee.
Thank you, that would be helpful. I think just as a final point, I suppose I'm concerned that there are 48 services that moved online, and while there are a large number of our citizens and residents can access them in that way without any issues, there are also citizens who for whatever reason cannot access these services now. And so therefore I am concerned that we've left a gap in service provision of the services that have already moved. So perhaps when we follow up separately, we can have a look at that, and you can reassure me that the services that have already moved online are also accessible to people who cannot access them digitally.
I'm happy to follow up, but I can give you an assurance that there are already alternative arrangements made, such as assisted digital, for example, and face-to-face meetings for some of the services that were in there. But I can meet with you out with this forum and give you more detail on the 48 services that have already moved online.
Yeah, I think so, but I think it's very important that we all heard that, what Karen said. And you maybe want to reiterate that, Karen, that there is an alternative means of communication available.
That's correct. The Council continues to provide assisted digital and other face-to-face means for services which have moved online.
Thank you. Kieran.
Thank you. You know, maximising technology, I'm aware that the council just north of my ward, into Braemar and into Aberdeenshire, that the public can go on and see the actual snowplows and where they are and where they're going to be. Is that something that we're going to progress so that especially in our rural communities, people can see when they're likely to get the snow cleared away on the road and they can get to the shops or to the work or etc.?
I think that would have been a question for Barbara. Yeah. I think we should ask Bill Atkinson, because he's seen his back in here. And in the previous guys, he was the font of all knowledge, so I'm sure he would be able to answer about snowplows and cameras.
Bizarrely, thanks. I might be able to offer some insight in relation to that particular subject, because a number of schools last winter and the winter before were able to do exactly that, because there is online facility to monitor where they are, and they were also able to name them and follow them by name. And one of our local primary schools actually won one of the competitions to name one of the gritters. So that facility does exist. I don't think it's a council facility. I think it's something that's more national.
Thank you. If there's no comments, can we note the report? Thank you. Is it Jackie Pepper? Okay, we'll go for Jackie. Moving on to paper 8, which is the Attainment and Pupil Equity Funding Update. I'll just hand straight over to Jackie to introduce the report.
That ball's been passed to me, Councillor. I do apologise. Just to say by way of introduction that this paper is actually an amalgamation of what was previously the annual attainment paper that always came to scrutiny around about this time, and we've incorporated a PEF update with that now into one paper. It is a necessarily extensive paper, I believe, which reflects the breadth and depth of the work undertaken in this part of our service. There are many positive stories in here, and there is also clarity about the areas that require further or future and new development. We hope that the executive summary and also the infographic, which I think has been handed out. Yep. We hope that they are both helpful in giving an overview and perhaps signposting you to some areas where you might want more detail. There are a number of officers here, Jackie and Donald MacLeod and myself, who will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. It is a really good report, and I think the infographic helps detail it really simply. But this paper has also been at lifelong learning before, but I'll open up to questions from the floor. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener. Again, this is the first time I have had the pleasure to read these reports, and perhaps that explains why I have some questions that maybe others have already had answered in previous iterations. I notice in terms of the particular measures of educational attainment that whilst there is good progress being made in literacy and numeracy, less so in writing. And I just wondered, and again this is just my own thoughts, I just wondered whether the increasing use of digital technology is having a detrimental effect on children's ability to write because of the reliance on iPads, etc.
Councillor Drysdale, in terms of the attainment paper that's come here over a number of years, there has always been a pattern whereby reading and listening and talking would be higher than writing, and that would be the case in Perth Kinross and is actually the case across Scotland as well. So I don't think we can attribute that differential to the use of technology. The skills required for writing do also require significant skills in terms of what we would call receptive literacy, so children's ability to think and to speak and to understand before they then begin to be able to write and take that on further. But it is something that we have looked at and taken a variety of approaches over a number of years to try and redress. And one of the approaches that we're currently engaged in is a wide-scale moderation exercise, because what we tend to find is that different people in different schools will have a different view about different bits of writing. And so what we're trying to assist staff who work in schools with is provide them with agreed benchmarks that would replicate what a particular level would look like and assist people with making more consistent and less subjective judgments about individual bits of writing. What we often find when colleagues perhaps from Education Scotland visit schools, or indeed when our quality improvement team visit schools, there would be a view that there's a difference between the reported levels of attainment and that which children can actually do. And sometimes some teachers will err on the side of caution. And that is something else that we're trying to do, is build teachers' confidence. What we are finding is with the introduction of the Scottish National Standardised Assessments, the SNSAs, teachers are reporting that they are finding that really helpful to come to more consistent and confident judgments about levels of writing. So it's something that we hope in the future we'll begin to see an upward trend in.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. That's helpful. I did have a second question, again, completely unrelated to the first. And it's in relation to what I'm sure is spoken about, or I know is spoken about in various forums within the council, is the issue of school meals and those who register for free school meals. If I understood the data and information contained on page 86 of our papers in relation to this matter, it seems to me, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going off in the wrong thread here, but if you isolate older school pupils, i.e. those between primary 4 and throughout secondary school, it seems to me that around about 13,500, there are about 13,500 school pupils, of which it is stated here that 1 in 5 are in poverty, so that's about 2,700. But only 1,100 or so register for free school meals. If I've understood the data correctly, and only 1,100 out of 2,700 children in poverty are actually bothering to or being urged to register for free school meals, is that as a result of the criteria, or is it the stigma of registering, or are there other factors at play?
I think there are a number of issues. One is that there is universal provision of free school meals and for all young people, primary 1, 2 and 3, and also for those who will be staying for a full day at nursery, that you can also have a free school meal. So there is no requirement to register for that because that's an entitlement that you receive. And what we are finding then, when youngsters are moving into P4 and beyond, the registration, and for those who are entitled, does drop off. And we understand from a lot of people that because they've been used for a number of years to not having to register, some are not doing it. There are also issues around stigma, but one of the bits of work that we're currently undertaking is with our colleagues in revenues and benefits, so that if you are entitled because of your qualifying benefits, we are trying to streamline the process so that actually you don't then have to register again for free school meals, that actually if your entitlement remains current for those benefits that would entitle your youngsters to a free meal, then they would automatically get that and there is no need for anything else to be filled out. So that's where we're aiming to get to as soon as possible.
That's certainly good news, and thank you for that. I think that would be important.
Thank you. If there's no other... Oh, there is another question. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you very much. I'm interested on page 86 that there are no less than 44 different languages used at home by our young people at school. Just out of interest, do we have the figures to say how many of those 44 languages are perhaps represented by just one child or one family? And what percentage of the total of 1,300 are Polish and Romanian speakers?
Councillor Parrott, could I ask you to repeat your question? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Yes, there's a total of 44 different languages used at home amongst our school young population. How many of those 44 languages, if you like, are represented just by one child or one family? And of the total, what percentage of the total number of children are Polish and Romanian speakers?
Okay, I don't have that detail, but I'm looking to James, who's furiously typing away, looking up that information, because we will hold it. So if we're not able to get that to you today,
if it's difficult,
we can certainly get it to you.
I'd be interested to see it later if you haven't.
Do you
got
have
it
that information, James?
Yeah, that's.
We will get that to you just as soon as possible.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Illingworth.
Could I have your views on whether the attainment gap will ever be completely closed?
Who knows? It certainly would not deter us from heading in that direction, but there would be, I think I've said before at one committee that there are a range of factors that contribute to that. There is no one single factor, and therefore there's no one single, simple, elegant solution to that. And it would require all the different factors to be addressed sufficiently well and consistently well all of the time for everybody to ensure that all of the gaps that existed cease to exist. And I think the reality is that from time to time, for some people, over a period of time, there will always be some kind of differential. But our aim, of course, is to reduce that to as little as possible for as many people as possible.
Thanks for that. I think everybody would agree with that last point. Comments? Last question then.
Thank you. Hi, Sheena, thank you. My question's on page 86, and it's your overall summary of about Perth and Kinross, and I don't understand the numbers in the opening paragraph. You said there's about 30,000 children and young people, and then there's about 21,000 approximately accommodated in school environment or in the early years in childcare setting. Does that mean then there's about 9,000 approximately either not in school or not in early years in childcare? Seems quite high compared to the overall.
There'll be a number who are not in public education in Perth and Kinross. There'll be a number who are not in any of our nurseries or early years settings. So there'll be a significant number of youngsters who would contribute to the remainder of that total amount. Councillor McCall, I'm looking to James to see if there's any other information. Yeah, that's what I meant by youngsters who would not be in nursery. So those who are not of an age to qualify for a nursery place would also be counted within that total amount, starting from zero.
Thank you. Any comments? Can we note the report? Thank you. I'm confident it will be Jackie that will be introducing this report. As confident as I can be. So this is it's paper 9, Perth and Kinross Child Protection Committee. It's a Standards and Quality Report. And I'll just hand straight over to Jackie to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Convener. Protecting children and young people is everyone's responsibility, and this annual report from the Child Protection Committee provides elected members with a detailed update on the work being taken forward over the last year by the Child Protection Committee. This is a very full report and sets out a wide range of activity that is contributing very positively to keeping children safe at home, at school and in their communities. The report also sets out a programme of joint self-evaluation and statistical information that is led, monitored and reviewed by the Child Protection Committee. It clearly shows evidence of improvement in working practices across partners and the achievements via our work in the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative. The data in this report shows increasing demands in relation to concerns about children, although the numbers of children placed on the Child Protection Register at any one time remains steady. The infographic on page 135 is a helpful summary of key messages. The Child Protection Committee has benefited from the appointment of an independent chair, Bill Atkinson, who's here today, and I'm very pleased that he's here to join us and able to answer any questions along with myself and Ross Drummond, who's the coordinator for the Child Protection Committee.
Thanks for that, Jackie. So we'll open up for questions for Jackie and her team. Councillor Drysdale.
Hi there. Thanks for that, Jackie, and much appreciated. As it happens, on my way here today on the radio, there was a piece about neglect, child neglect, and the efforts being made nationally in relation to trying to intervene as early as possible in cases of potential neglect before that neglect becomes a crime. Can either yourself or Bill say something about the efforts within Perth and Kinross to detect incidents of neglect before they become a crime?
Thank you very much, Councillor Drysdale. I'll start in answering your question and hand over to Bill if he's got anything to add to that. You've raised a very important issue around neglect, and it's certainly been an area of priority for the Child Protection Committee for a number of years now. The two areas that I would like to draw your attention to are our work with the Centre of Excellence for Looked After Children in Scotland, where we're working to address neglect and enhance well-being. Is a project called Anew, using those letters. But our focus here in Perth and Kinross has been around identifying vulnerability in pregnancy and working with women through in that first year of the life of the baby's life. And we have a transformation zone in the report that you have in front of you sets that out. This is a long-term improvement agenda, primarily focused on the work with health staff, midwifery and health visitors and community resources. But we think that this is one way of transforming the way in which we provide that earlier support and identification of vulnerability before the child's even born, and one way of tackling neglect in the future. Another area that we've taken forward, and again that's across Perth and Kinross, but along with our partners in Dundee and Angus, is we had a practitioner conference on neglect, and it was the theme of connecting with neglect, but it was very much aimed at frontline practitioners. We had over 200 people attend that, and the aim was to provide them with insight into research and strategies really that they can take forward themselves to tackle that and address it at the earliest point, and that was very well evaluated. Bill might want to say a bit more about the Child Protection Committee's focus on neglect.
No, I think that's probably covered most of the areas, other than just to acknowledge that we've been looking along with some national partners in relation to the relationship between neglect, the complex relationship between neglect and child poverty. And we've had a recent involvement and presentation, and we'll get further details about that next week from Claire Mailer, who you'll know is the leading for the Council in relation to child poverty strategies. So there's some work that needs to be done there, along with the work that Jackie said. And I suppose to say for some number of years now, we've always looked at child protection within the broader sense of children's services and trying to identify early what are the issues before they get to the point where there has to be an intervention for child protection. So as Jackie says, the whole issue about how do we identify vulnerable families, how do we do that through our education colleagues and the universal services of health, and how do we respond quickly to that, and we constantly auditing and reviewing how that's operating in practice through the work we do with the Child Protection Committee.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on that and just ask if a message could be issued through this forum or through this committee in terms of, I think it's the first thing you said, Jackie, in your introductory remarks about this area being everyone's responsibility. Can you comment, please, on what somebody should do if they have a concern about potential neglect of a child. You know, should they speak up, or should they keep it to themselves? If they should speak up, how should they speak up?
I'm sure that Bill and I can speak with one voice on this, which would be that there is no alternative other than to speak up, and that we widely circulate and disseminate the relevant contact information, which is 24/7, 365. So if that can be publicised widely, then nobody would be turned away, and nobody would be accused of raising false concerns. I think we need to understand that this is about responding immediately to children who are in crisis and at risk, but it's also about an opportunity to provide help and support for those families who need it, and they're both the same, you know, the different sides of the same coin, and I'm sure Bill would agree with that.
Yes, I agree with that.
A follow-up to my follow-up, if I just on that point about reporting it, can you therefore confirm that the number 01738 476 768 is a 24/7 helpline, or people can email childprotection@pkc.gov.uk?
You're quite correct in that.
Jolly
Thank you,
good.
Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. You, as a substitute, you've almost started running the show. Have we any other questions on this report? Which is a lot of information, and I hope that we can do more justice to it on when it comes to full council on the 18th. And hopefully Bill will be able to attend that day as well. So, thanks. Any comments? No comments. Can we note the report? Okay, we'll move on to paper 10, and it'll be again Jackie to introduce the report, and this time it's the Adult Support and Protection Annual Report. So Jackie, if you want to introduce this report, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. This is an annual report, and it's recently been introduced as an annual report to provide regular updates, to provide assurance to elected members about services to protect adults at risk and abuse and neglect. Previously, this was a biannual report, but we felt that we should come into line with reporting in relation to child protection. This report sets out the arrangements that the Adult Protection Committee has taken forward over the last year to develop a greater insight and oversight into adult protection, and identifies a number of key priorities for development over the next year, which are included in its improvement plan. And this includes a commitment to develop closer working between the Adult Protection and Child Protection Committees, and bringing them closer into alignment. And I'm pleased to say that Bill Atkinson is also the independent convener of the Adult Protection Committee, so is well placed to do that. Over the last year, we've seen an increase in the number of adults referred via the vulnerable persons reports, which come from police, and those are up 37%. But pleasingly, we've seen that these are screened, or 96% are screened within 24 hours. And importantly, 83% of people feel safer as a result of that, and any intervention that's taken forward. So happy to take any questions along with Mr. Atkinson and Mary Notman, who's the lead officer for the Adult Protection Committee.
Thanks, Jackie. Open to floor. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the report. I suppose my first comment is I'm pleased to see that learning disabilities has been separated out into a category of its own, which I think is the correct thing to do. So thank you for that. I have a question on that, though, that on page 208, you mentioned that a lot of the referrals come from a care setting, and I'm curious to understand if that comes from the care provider meaning that the risk factor is coming from outside of the care environment, or whether it's coming from family and guardians and others who might be involved in that person's life.
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a combination of them both, and I'll maybe ask Mary if she's got any more details that, in terms of the balance between one and t'other. We've certainly done a lot of work with the care sector, along with the Care Commission and with the SSSC in terms of their responsibilities to the workforce. We have a number of representatives from the care sector on the Adult Protection Committee. And as you'll see from this report and previous reports, large-scale investigations has been one of our foci, and that's really because of the awareness and the training that we've done to make the sector aware of their adult protection responsibilities. I think in the past, probably issues happened within the sector, and they may have reported them, may have dealt with them as part of their employee relations, may have reported them to the SSSC, may have reported them to the Care Commission, but hadn't realised the importance of recognising them as an adult protection issue. So seeing the increase in that and the high proportion of large-scale investigations we saw as a positive matter. It was about the sector being aware of their responsibilities and reporting them to us, and we're seeing the same pattern in relation to the care at home sector. So I think overall, the balance would be a combination. Unit managers and staff themselves are aware and are encouraged to report incidents which are adult protection incidents to us. We've been trying to develop more sensitively and in a more sophisticated way how to respond to that, rather than in all cases charging out with an adult protection inquiry or investigation. We need to handle that sensitively, and I think we have developed through strategic meetings and through experience better arrangements between ourselves, the police and the sector. But we're also encouraging and welcome, obviously welcome from concerned relatives or from some of the residents themselves, perhaps through the increase in advocacy that we've highlighted in the report, that they themselves feel able to speak up when they feel that they've not been properly protected within the setting that they're in. But I'm happy to try and discuss with Mary whether we could break down the statistics from the source of referral as to what the percentage is of relatives or carers as opposed to the professional referral through the care sector itself.
I think that's very helpful, Bill, thank you. I suppose my concern, you mentioned the care at home sector, but a large number of people with learning disabilities, adults, live in a home environment, and as a consequence are very often become dependent and protective indeed of those who support them in their own home. And I am certainly aware from my own experience that as a family member and as a guardian, nobody has contacted me and explained, if you have a concern, this is where you go. So perhaps it's something to consider going forward, to think, how do you communicate effectively with the wider community that is involved in these vulnerable, not just for learning disabilities, but others as well, particularly adults, that the concerned relatives and guardians, who sometimes in fact may be the people who are putting somebody at risk. I understand there's a risk there as well, but I think the checks and balances could be developed a little bit further perhaps. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I think we've obviously engaged locally and nationally in campaigns, and I think there's a campaign that's out next year, certainly through my national contacts. My understanding is there'll be a national campaign highlighting the whole issue of adult protection again, and we've had that in the past, and we've done some work locally with the press and elsewhere. But absolutely, I think there is an important element in making sure that relatives and carers who have any concerns at all, in the same way as we just mentioned in relation to child protection, if they have any concerns about adult protection, then they have a duty to report that so that we can thoroughly investigate that for that particular situation and for maybe others, because in some circumstances these carers are going into different families. We've also done some work, and you'll see in the report, through our commissioning team, to make sure that when we monitor the significant number of contracts we've got with care providers in the care at home sector, that they're aware of how we will be more closely scrutinising the contract to make sure that they're following proper adult protection arrangements as part of their contractual commitment to us.
That paper will also be at full council on the 18th of December. So we now move on to paper 11. Yeah. Before the turkey. So we'll move on to paper 11 and we'll just hand over to Lisa Simpson to introduce the report.
Thank you, Convener. This is the annual performance report in terms of our complaints handling process. Can I just draw your attention to the second bullet point on 1.8 of the report, which was pointed out to me by the eagle-eyed people at the Perth Advertiser. That should read 1803. It was an error due to fat finger typing, but on behalf of our complaints team, they were just personally delighted that the Perth Advertiser had read it. So it was a good news story for us. This is quite a positive report. It's a very positive report. Our complaints handling process is robust. The arrangements around that are robust. A slight increase in terms of the number of complaints that we are processing, but we actually see that as quite a positive and a good news story. We encourage the reporting and the recording of any expressions of dissatisfaction because that helps shape and influence improvements going forward. There was nothing in any analysis of the complaints that were coming through that identified any particular problems in a particular area or in a particular, as regards a particular policy. They were all fairly widespread and generic. Our complaints handling process, you will see just by the stats, the number that were resolved. There is an awful lot of data in the appendices. For that, I do apologise. However, they are required to be reported in accordance with the SPSO's requirement. I'm not entirely sure how many of these indicators actually help us particularly well, but it does allow you to drill down and look at this. And if there's any particular questions, I'm happy to answer that. But I think in terms of providing assurance to this committee, our complaints handling process is robust and is working well.
Thank you, Lisa. Do we have any questions on the report? Councillor Parrott.
I'm sure I asked the same question last year, but I don't see any indications it's been sort of picked up on this year. We have 1,903 complaints. How many people make those 1,903 complaints? And do we have any vexatious complainers who are routinely complaining and frankly whose complaints are perhaps yeah.
There's a breakdown of where the complaints come from. So I think there is.
But my question is that I'm not sure that there's any analysis of whether the 1,900 complaints come from 1,900 different people, or whether there's any indication that, say, one person is complaining once a week about something.
We do have that analysis, and that we do a breakdown of where the complaints we would know by service. If we have vexatious complaints, and there are vexatious complainers, and there are very, very few of those, we don't really have. The ones that do, I would suggest, abuse the complaints process and are deemed vexatious. We do have an unacceptable use policy which we do apply. So if there are vexatious complainers, then these can be managed in a certain way, but there are very, very few. Most people are making a genuine complaint with, and a lot of the complaints are also people just not happy with the decision or the outcome, or there's an awful lot of things where people are just not happy and some things cannot be fixed. But we could try and do a breakdown of them, but because we don't actually have a system that collates that and draws that out, an awful lot of these stats are put together by cross-referencing Excel spreadsheets So we don't actually have that detailed analysis. But in terms of vexatious complainers, there are very, very few. Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. I've got a couple of questions. The first one, I was curious as to, I note that a customer satisfaction survey is issued inviting complainants who have their responses at stage 2 in the process. I'm just wondering why that isn't extended to everyone that complains to seek their degree of customer satisfaction.
This is something that's actually been discussed at a forum across, you know, in terms of complaints handling across the piece, in terms of sort of national feedback around this. One of the difficulties is that if most people have had their complaints resolved at stage 1, then they're, you know, the measure of not being satisfied at stage 1 is that they progress it to stage 2, which is why the targeting around stage 2 in terms of trying to gauge customer satisfaction. But this is something that's been looked at by a number of local authorities across the piece for a number of years. And we're either dealing with so small sample numbers, because in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the number of services and that we provide to the population that we have and the number of interactions that individuals have with the council, it's a very, very small number that we're actually dealing with in terms of stage 2 complaints, and we haven't actually found an effective way of doing that. But it's something that the forum are actually working on and looking to try and develop.
Okay, thanks. My second question, again, unrelated, is there is, as you say, a fair amount of data here. I do like a bit of data, but not as much as Councillor Parrott, mind you. But what is missing for me from the data that I've seen here, unless I've missed it, is some sort of comparison, appreciating how difficult it might be with other local authorities and our performance versus theirs, and also a breakdown of complaints by service. I appreciate that there is a table, local authority complaints by category received by the SPSO. I'm just wondering why we don't have that for all the complaints, because that would give a picture as to satisfaction in terms of each service area.
I mean, I think part of the problem is that there is so much that needs to be reported on in terms of indicators that we could have a team that would spend an awful lot of time just producing this report when actually they could be handling complaints. I mean, I think that we could draw out, we do get a breakdown in terms of how many complaints are attributed to each service, so that I actually think that's possibly in there, but we could draw that out, and if you wanted that drawn out and put into the body of the report for next year, that wouldn't be a problem. And in terms of benchmarking with others, there is the fora, there are user groups that talk about this, but people take a different approach. We all follow the SPSO, but what people categorise as a complaint and people's enthusiasm for encouraging people to complain and to record complaints, clearly the appetite for that differs from authority to authority. We've worked quite hard to be quite proactive around that, to say that actually, you know, using your complaints process as part of your improvement process. So we possibly record a number of things that some other authorities, it wouldn't reach the threshold that they would categorise as a complaint.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that point. It would be difficult, I think, to compare across authorities. I just wondered if there was such data, but I
can feed it back to the complaints team, though, and see if there is anything that's out there that might be useful to include in next year's report. Yeah,
but I mean, I do think it would be useful, and if it is here, I do apologise and I have missed it, but you know, to see the breakdown by service area across all complaints.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor McEwan.
There's a statement in here that I completely agree with. It says that complaints are a valued part of the council as a way of identifying areas where improvements to services and processes can be made. It's a similar approach to the NHS as well, so I'm very familiar with it. Has there ever been a group of complaints that are very similar that have then led to a policy being changed and rewritten?
There is feedback when complaints are processed, and there's feedback if they're not just random and we get one or two that were similar, then there is regular dialogue with the services. And I have to say that the service response to any feedback about, we've had 2 or 3 complaints about the same thing, has been very positive, and changes have been made if they've been required. I mean, I think that other area that would give you great assurance, if you actually look at what's in effect almost a minuscule amount that is going to as far as the SPSO and coming back with recommendations to change policy or practice or approach, it is absolutely tiny. And when we get that, these are all adhered to and implemented with no fuss. So I think there is very much a culture that the complaints process is just accepted as an integral part of our continuous improvement journey.
Thanks. If there's no other questions, do we have any comments? No comments. Can we note the report? Oh, comment? Yep.
Just to say it's an excellent report. Congratulations to everybody involved. And that we should always welcome complaints. I know it's cheesy, but the gift of feedback. So thank you for that.
That concludes the business in the public domain. I'd like, if the committee would indulge us for 5 minutes if we go into private session, please.